Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
What's up, guys? This is Daniel Logan, Boba Fett from Attack of the Clones, The Clone Wars, Book of Boba, Skywalker Saga game, and hopefully many more things in the Star Wars galaxy. You are listening to Jay and Dennis on Podcast Stardust. Yep, this is the way I've spoken.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And this episode will feature the second installment of our year-long series celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace. But before we get into that, Jay, you want to remind everybody where we can be found around the internet?
We are being found on X, Facebook, and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Yeah. X is kind of like the Phantom social media account for us at this point. So.
I love that.
All right. The disk is aligned. The signal's boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So in just a second here, we'll get into that discussion of part 2 of the Phantom Menace, or what is part 2 for us anyway. Just want to note that we had some really weird technical issues while we were trying to record this conversation. So Jay had to use your phone to call into this. So our audio is not up to our usual standards for at least that part of the conversation, but you'll still be able to get all of Jay's wonderful insight regardless.
Well, thank you. Yes, we had a very technical menace, that's for sure. So apologize, but technology is always great when it works.
All right. Well, we've got a returning guest, Ryder Waldron, standing by. So let's get to it. So here he is. You know him, you love him. The first gold jacket guest of Podcast Stardust.
Yeah.
Co-host of Idiot's Array and host of the Star Wars School of Dentistry. Ryder Waldron, welcome back to Podcast Stardust.
Thanks, and I will wear that gold jacket proudly. I am super excited to be back, and I just like starting off the year with you guys. It always makes it fun, and let's make it especially fun to talk about the Phantom Menace. So I'm really excited.
Oh, we're very excited to speak with you.
Yes.
And we know you will wear that gold jacket very well. Very well.
Oh, I'll wear it every day of my life. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, normally we start the series off with you each year, but you had a conflict last month, so we bumped you to month 2, but hey, that's still close enough to the beginning. We're just getting into this movie. Ryder, before we get into this segment, you want to fill in everybody on what's going on with Idiot's Array and the Star Wars School of Dentistry.
So, Idiot's Array, we're getting ready to cover the Bad Batch, which comes out a week. Well, let's see, 6 days from when we're recording this. So that should be good. I'm excited about the Bad Batch. It's like that show that I can't believe I love it that much, I guess. I don't know. I wasn't that excited when it first was announced. And now I just can't get enough of it. So it's great. I'm excited to see how everything ties up. The Star Wars School of Dentistry, I've been off for like a month or 2 because I've been coaching or assistant coaching a junior jazz basketball team. So that's taken up some of my time.
Oh, wow.
And so I will get back to some new episodes soon.
Okay.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Well, I got to say,
Yeah.
when you said Jazz basketball team, it took me 2 seconds to realize you were talking about the Utah Jazz. I was like,
Yes.
oh, wow. You play jazz and basketball at the same time?
This every once in a while, I like to go down to the local club and play some tunes, but yeah, no, basketball.
Love it.
Okay, well, we usually like to start these episodes with some general questions about our guest's experience with the movie that's in question. Of course, we're talking about the Phantom Menace. So I'll kick us off. What can you tell us about your first experience seeing the Phantom Menace? Was it in the theaters? Did you see it at home? Do you remember where you saw it, who you were with, and what your initial reaction was?
I remember pretty much everything about it. Yeah, I saw it. I guess it's May 19th is when it came out in 1999. I saw it at the Newgate Mall in Ogden, Utah, at a new Cinemark theater. It was a time when stadium seating was new, but there were no reserved seats. So we had to line up hours before. I just saw it with some friends. It was my senior year of college. I was graduating college in like 2 weeks or something like that when when this came out. And I'm one of those people who loved it for the first time I saw it. It'd been 16 years since we'd seen Star Wars, and I had gone from a second grade, probably first grade when I saw Return of the Jedi until almost graduating college before we got a new Star Wars movie. So, of course, I'd just eaten up all the hype. I'd been to Taco Bell and KFC to get all the whatever you call them, the giveaways with meals and things like that. I'd bought as many action figures as I could afford, and I loved it when I saw it. I saw it it was 1 o'clock or 1:30 in the afternoon on opening day, and I couldn't wait to get home to go back and rewatch scenes from A New Hope, like when Luke is talking with Beru and Owen about Anakin, and Luke and Obi-Wan are talking about Anakin. And then in Empire, when Yoda is mentioning, powerful Jedi was he, and Return of the Jedi, when Obi-Wan and Luke are talking about, Obi-Wan's story about Anakin, how he died, and Darth Vader killing him. And I just, after seeing the Phantom Menace and seeing how he was as a boy, I couldn't wait to go back and just see all this other stuff that when they talked about Anakin, and nothing changed in those scenes, but it just felt like it hit a little harder because now I'd seen Anakin as a kid. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed the Phantom Menace when it came out. I don't know, maybe it was because it'd been so long since we'd had a Star Wars movie, but I really enjoyed all of it.
That's fantastic. Well, that's one thing that you've always been really awesome about since I've known you, is just being able to tie threads together. And so it's obvious that you've done that, for your whole fandom career, basically, and seeing how all these scenes tie in. So that is awesome. And speaking of scenes, we'll just get to our next question here. What is your favorite scene from the Phantom Menace?
Oh, I knew this was coming because I listened to the first episode of this. And so I'm going to give two. I'm going to cheat. And one of the coolest scenes is when Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are fighting Darth Maul in the hangar, and he's getting backed up towards a closed door, and he uses the Force to throw something on the ground at the door opener. And it was just so cool. He just used the Force with such confidence and just threw that thing right at the door, and it opens right up. The other scene that I love is when Anakin is leaving Shmi on Tatooine, and that really, I don't know why it hits me so hard. I don't know. I grew up with a single mom. Maybe that's it. But I love that. It's a really emotional scene. And for people who say that, some of the dialogue was wooden or, whatever, I mean, watch that scene. That's a tough scene to watch. And Shmi really holds it together. And man, that's a good one. So I really enjoyed both of those scenes.
Oh, those are awesome. And especially also as a parent now, I'm sure it hits different too. I know it does. It does for me, for sure.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that scene between Shmi and Anakin is highly underrated. I think that was expertly acted. I know Jake Lloyd got a lot of grief over his acting in that movie, I think, which is unfair because I think a lot of it comes down to the writing and the direction he received. But that scene between him and Prunella was really, really well done. So the final question that we have here is, who is your favorite character in The Phantom Menace?
I usually say Qui-Gon. I just think Qui-Gon's cool. I mean, he's calm. He has faults, which is maybe something we'll talk about tonight with the scenes we're going to talk about. But I'd say Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan Kenobi is overall one of my favorite Star Wars characters. So I really loved seeing him as a younger character. But I think I got to go with Qui-Gon. He was just awesome in all of this. I think, and being Liam Neeson, it makes it even cooler. But yeah, I go with Qui-Gon usually.
Mhm.
Very good choice.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's criminal that they weren't able to get more Star Wars with him, and that they
Yes.
waited this long to even get into Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, very
Yeah,
good
I
choice.
agree. And I can remember buying the soundtrack or the score, and I'm sure most people probably had this experience when you look on the back and it had one of the titles of one of the songs is Qui-Gon's Noble End or something like that. I'm like, well, you got to be
Yeah.
kidding me! I already know, and I got that before the movie came out, so I thought, okay, well, this is going to be a one shot with Qui-Gon, but still a good movie.
I got to think if the Phantom Menace came out at some time in the past couple years, we would have had a Disney Plus series featuring Qui-Gon, and
Yes.
whether it was like Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's adventures or something, but more of a series featuring him. That would have been pretty cool. So
Oh,
missed
that'd be
opportunity.
great.
But
Yeah, that'd
Yeah.
been great.
Maybe Tales of the Jedi. That'd be an awesome one to be able to
Yes.
delve into.
I'd sign me up. I'd be there for that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's dive into this segment. We are picking up where we left off last time. And that's at 10 minutes and 45 seconds. And we're going to be going to roughly 21 minutes and 33 seconds for this segment of the film. We start off on Naboo. Qui-Gon and a bunch of animals are running away from the Trade Federation droid transports that are basically obliterating the forest and the swamp that's there. This is our introduction to Jar Jar Binks. Qui-Gon essentially tackles him because Jar Jar can't get his wits about him to duck or run away from these transport tanks. And Qui-Gon's pretty grumpy about it. He gets up, and tells him, you almost got us killed. Are you brainless? And then, as Jay was quoting earlier, I spake is his response. And Qui-Gon's got the classic response: the ability to speak does not make you intelligent. So, and after that, Jar Jar insists on staying with Qui-Gon after he saved his life. So it's demanded by the gods. So this is our introduction to Jar Jar, and we get quite a bit of him here in the next 10 minutes. And then going forward for the first half of the film. Ryder, what do you think about Jar Jar, and what did you think about him when we met him here?
So I've never been one of those people that hated Jar Jar Binks. I've always been one that stuck up for him, and I see the need for Jar Jar in this. And a lot of people complain about how annoying he is, and how he's so clumsy and causing all these problems. And what was the point of even having him? Well, I mean, the point of having him is clear if you actually watch the movie. But the reason why he needed to be so annoying is because if he's not annoying to us, how are we going to believe that he's annoying to the Jedi? I just don't understand why some fans would complain about him and not understand why it's important for him to be like that. I mean, if he was cool like Ahmad Best is in real life, well, people would be like, well, why don't the Jedi want to hang around with him? Why would they kick somebody like that out of the Gungan city? I think it was so necessary, and I think Ahmad Best did such a great job. And I'm glad that he's getting the love that he deserves now, 25 years later or whatever, But Jar Jar to me is kind of a sympathetic figure. He's kind of awkward. He doesn't have a lot of friends. He probably needs some friends. And so, his story arc is kind of a victory for people who are held down or bullied or awkward in their teenage years and things like that. So I just really, I wouldn't say I love Jar Jar. He's not like in my top 10 characters, but I don't hate him like so many people do. I think he is so necessary and important to this movie.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And Jay Ryder brings up a point that I want to follow up on here. He's clumsy and he's annoying like this, but do you, what are your thoughts on Jar Jar, and what do you think of him compared to the other Gungans that we meet in this movie?
Well, I've always been a Jar Jar apologist as well. Ryder, as you were talking about him, I was thinking to myself, I wrote a whole blog about the whole bullying thing when I was back with Coffee with Kenobi and Jar Jar, but I was always enchanted by him. And I feel like a lot of that was because when I went to see the movie for the first time, I took my niece and nephew. And so they were young and like very young. We're talking 7 and 5 years old, I think is what they were both at the time. And so watching them watch Jar Jar and just the magic on their face, and the giggles was just something that just always endeared me to Jar Jar. And, even after the fact, I thought he was a necessary part of the puzzle, in terms of showing how there's things in Star Wars that, even though there's different types of aliens, and a lot of times the aliens can be scary or they can be intimidating or they can be really exotic, there's also some that are just meant to be fun. And as far as his relationship with the rest of the Gungans are concerned, I thought it was actually a really nice touch to show how even within certain types of civilizations or communities, people can be cast out but you can still find your place with someone else, or you can still find purpose in something else. So, but yeah, I've always loved Jar Jar.
Yeah, I just occurred to me watching this segment. We eventually will get to Boss Nass here and we'll talk about him a bit, but all the Gungans are a bit ridiculous in this thing. And I can't help but wonder if maybe some of the Gungans were portrayed like some of them were later in the Clone Wars, which was this fierce warrior reputation that Jar Jar will claim that they have later in the movie. If this wouldn't have maybe helped Jar Jar. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to explain this well, but he is an outlier, and he is, as you pointed out, Jay, bullied because he's different and he's clumsy and he's had some unfortunate accidents, but his heart is in the absolute right place. And he's trying to do good, but he gets in his own way and all that. So I don't know. We'll put a pin in this and we'll get back to it when we get to Boss Nass, because I think that's gonna help our conversation a bit as well. But right after this, we see Obi-Wan, who's being pursued by a battle droid on an STAP, STAP, if you want to call it. And Qui-Gon pulls out his lightsaber and deflects the bolts back into the droids and destroys them. And then they're going to get out of there before more droids show up. And Jar Jar's not thinking, and he just blurts out, "Hey, we could go to Gunga City. It's a hidden city." And they're like, "Hey, that's great. Let's go." And it's like, "Oh, on second thought, I can't really take you because I've been banished." And this is when Obi-Wan kind of almost like gleefully goes after Jar Jar. It's like, you hear that, the sound of 1,000 terrible things coming this way. If they find us, they will crush us, grind us into tiny pieces, and blast us into oblivion. And then Jar says, "No, your points will take them. Let's go." So they head off there. So kind of following up on the conversation, it almost seems like two different ways of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan talking to Jar Jar here. It's not a big gulf, but Qui-Gon is trying to point out to him, is like, "Do you really want to be around when the droids show up?" But Obi-Wan kind of like really preys upon that fear. What do you think about that, Ryder?
Yeah, that's interesting because, Qui-Gon is kind of rude to Jar Jar at first. He calls him, like you said, he calls him brainless. And then when they find out there's a hidden city, all of a sudden Qui-Gon's like, "Oh, well, maybe we can use this guy." Qui-Gon gets a lot of credit for being kind to everyone and helping like these poor wayfaring souls, but a lot of the time he's just using them for his own benefit. And it is quite, I don't know, kind of a change real quick there. And Obi-Wan, I feel like he's kind of he's not a teenager at this point, but he's in his mid-20s, kind of the hothead, thinking, "Oh, I'm cool," and maybe a little bit of that, "I'm better than you. I'm a Jedi. You're somebody that lives in a swamp" type of situation, and maybe you're not as smart as I am, and I can intimidate you and scare you into taking us to your hidden city where I don't really want to be your friend, but we will use you to our benefit. So I feel like it gives me a little more sympathy or maybe even empathy for Jar Jar, because he's just trying to help out. He's just trying to help these guys that seem to be in trouble, and they are, I don't know, maybe just taking it a little too far by their intimidation tactics, I guess. I don't know. I'm kind of painting Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon in a bad light, but maybe I'm taking Jar Jar's side on all this.
Yeah, giddy is a good word, Dennis, that you used, that Obi-Wan was. And it reminds me, even from the very get-go, as we were talking last time, and seeing Obi-Wan in this phase of his life, it's just like, oh, it's baby Obi-Wan. And as you pointed out, Ryder, I mean, he's just kind of getting out of his teenage years, and it's almost like I could see this happening on the playground. You know what I mean? Like, here's this kid that's like, oh yeah, and it's going to grind us into tiny pieces and blast us into oblivion, just having gleeful fun with this whole thing, and it's just, yeah. But yeah, I see that, he's supposed to be a Jedi, and he's supposed to be empathetic and compassionate, and all these things. But I think he was just following Qui-Gon's lead too. You know what I mean? Like, Qui-Gon was kind of doing sort of the same thing. The ability to speak does not make you intelligent, which, by the way, is one of my favorite quotes. But you know what I mean? Like, he's just kind of following in Qui-Gon's sort of footsteps and role modeling.
Yeah, see, for me, I don't think Qui-Gon was really had any malicious intent in there. He was frustrated. It's like, you almost got killed, dude. What are you doing staying there? Duck and cover, run away, do something. Just don't stand there. And so Qui-Gon, quote unquote, saved his life by basically just tackling him. It wasn't a whole lot that he had to do there. And then Jar Jar is like, oh, you saved. And I think part of Jar Jar's reaction comes out of loneliness. He has been banished. And here someone is who went so far as to do something to save him from this oncoming threat. The thing about Obi-Wan, though, is that he will collectively refer to Jar Jar and Anakin as pathetic life forms later in this movie here. And so, we like to think of the Jedi and Obi-Wan as being these kind people that are out there and doing the best for the galaxy. But I think there is something to, perhaps he's getting his eyes opened on this adventure that, maybe they need to be not quite so, I don't know, not condescending, but a little bit more appreciative or not so judgmental about everybody else that they come across, because they don't have the similar backgrounds. Everyone's got their own type of background and what they faced and what they're going through. And I don't think Obi-Wan really appreciates what Jar Jar has been up against.
Yeah, and I think, there's probably in Star Wars, there's a lot of life lessons, and there's probably one here that just because somebody is different doesn't mean they don't have something to offer. Just because they don't seem as skilled, doesn't mean they don't have something to offer. And there's a big parallel to be drawn between the Gungans and the Ewoks. Han Solo didn't have an appreciation for the Ewoks, and then they ended up saving his life and, helping them, defeat the Empire when it looked like they were just some little teddy bears. And so the Gungans are the same way. They're just looked down upon, it feels like. And I think that's probably a lesson that Obi-Wan learned from this and from Qui-Gon, that these people who seem like pathetic life forms aren't pathetic. They just are different, and they have other skills to offer. And it goes back to, some of the arrogance and hubris of the Jedi. Simple things like this can lead to even more hubris and arrogance, and lead to the downfall of the Order in general.
Indeed.
Well said.
Okay, so Jar Jar's convinced, and he leads them to the edge of the water there in the swamp. He does a very elaborate dive into the water. The Jedi pull out their rebreathers, and then they begin swimming into the pond, lake, whatever you want to call it. And they come across Gunga City, which is really a bunch of golden bubbles strewn together. And they enter through a membrane-like portal, which seems to dry them off to a big degree. And Jar Jar immediately declares it's so good being home. And then Captain Tarples rides up and tells Jar Jar, you shouldn't have come back. You some big doo-doo this time. And then another Gungan guard wanders up and just shocks Jar Jar. And we get one of Jar Jar's catchphrases, how rude, out of this here. So we see right away that, Jar Jar is true to his word. He is an outcast here and not particularly welcomed home. But what are your thoughts on Gunga City there, Ryder?
Well, I thought it was really cool because we haven't seen anything like this, or hadn't seen anything like this in Star Wars. And Star Wars is good about building worlds and creating new environments. And this is one of those planets that has two different environments. They have the land and then the underwater stuff. And most planets in Star Wars are just kind of one habitat or one climate. And so it's interesting, and I don't know. I just think it's really cool how they've built this up, and to be underwater would be really cool to be. I don't know. I just thought it looked really cool. I did have one concern when the Jedi start walking into this pond or lake. How heavy are those robes going to be when they get
Right?
wet? I just I'm just like, you guys are idiots. What are you doing? So, but yeah, Gunga City is super cool.
Yeah, good point about the robes. I hadn't actually thought about that till you mentioned it here. But they sure did get dried fast when they showed up in
Yeah, they
Gunga
did.
City.
They
So,
did.
Jay, you have thoughts on that before we move on to Boss Nass?
Oh, I just thought just magical, these as you pointed out, Ryder, with the whole world building that especially the prequels do, with the enhanced digital and the effects and things like that. It was just absolutely gorgeous. And it
Mhm.
kind of reminded me even of things like going back to like Flash Gordon, just being so fantastical. And yeah, and then when they do show up in there and Jar Jar, because Jar Jar was saying how they don't take lightly to strangers and they're not going to like you here. And you could just see, I was trying to figure out when they first came through the little membrane, when all of the Gungans were reacting, were they reacting more to Jar Jar? Like, oh my gosh, he's back, he's back, he's back.
Hmm.
Or were they reacting to Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, or maybe a little bit of both? But what do you guys think?
Well, I'm wondering if they would even notice if Jar Jar hadn't, basically yelled out how good it was being home. And how many people are just going to notice Jar Jar walk in through what looks like the front door of the city there? I suspect the Jedi showing up, because there are no other alien species, or I shouldn't call them aliens. They're in their own world. But there aren't any other species besides Gungans there in Gunga City. So
Yeah.
that had to stick out to a lot of people really quickly.
Well, and it seemed like, at least when they talked to Boss Nass, that they were aware of the invasion up on the land, and so, knowing that's going on, you would be a little alarmed at seeing some strangers come walking into your town, and I would be worried they were coming to take over.
Good point. Good point. So Tarpals takes them all to see Boss Nass and the rest of the bosses there in Gunga City, and it is very clear. There are no uncertain terms here. There is, no mixed message coming out of Boss Nass. It's like, you're not supposed to be here. There's a droid army up there. That's a problem for the Naboo. You're not bringing them here. And, what in the world are you guys doing here? What are you thinking? I can't do Boss Nass's voice and all the Gungan speak, so I'm not going to. But Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are pointing out to him that once the surface is conquered, the Gungans are going to next. Boss Nass is doubtful about this, that, they don't even know we're here, which actually is somewhat true, because we find out later, the battle droids are saying these rumored underwater villages that they must have just found out about. And then Obi-Wan points out, there's a symbiotic circle between you and the Naboo. What happens to one's going to impact the other. You really should do something. You really should interfere. But again, Boss Nass doesn't want anything to do with them. And Qui-Gon finally preys upon this by using the Jedi mind trick. And Boss Nass is going to speed them on their way. He's going to give them a bongo. They're going to go through the Planet Core. And then Jar Jar, is like, hey, any help you could give me would be hot, because he's about to be punished. And then Qui-Gon brings up the life debt that Jar Jar owes him. And so Boss Nass sends Jar Jar with him. And I think he's got to be somewhat relieved just to get him out of his hair, the way that they were asking there. Okay, so getting back to the conversation we had a bit earlier about the Gungans, Boss Nass is kind of a ridiculous figure as well. What do you think he does for the reputation of the Gungans here? Does he enhance it? Does he detract from it? Or is it neutral? What do you think, Ryder?
Well, yeah, I think it takes away from it, because he seems kind of like the bumbling leader. Like, oh, there's no way they can find out about us. They don't know where, like you said. But as a leader, you've got to, I would think of the worst case scenario. Okay, they might not know we're here, but what if they do? Like, the arrogance of him thinking that they're totally safe down there, and like, the Naboo are on their own. We're not going to help them. And it's kind of like, yeah, I get it. You might not like the Naboo, but the enemy of my enemy is my, how does it go? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Is that right? So,
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
so you'd think, okay, I might not like the Naboo, but I kind of have to live with them. yeah, maybe we don't want these other people, this trade federation coming down and invading us. I would get really territorial about that. And it's kind of like, somebody can, I could make fun of one of my friends for doing something, but the second somebody else makes fun of one of my friends, I'm going to stick up for that friend. And so, I just I don't think Boss Nass came off looking really great right now. He does later on in the movie, but at this point, I don't think so.
Hmm. And I think one of the things that maybe was a bit heavy-handed in the segment, Jay, was that Boss Nass is going on about we know like in the Naboo, they think as their brains are so big, and that basically the Naboo look down on the Gungans. So why should I help them? What did you think about the way that message was conveyed?
Well, I mean, it was basically just setting up the idea that even though you've got these two worlds that are supposed to be symbiotic, there's an obvious divide between them. And, that's the whole reason why Boss Nass is basically saying, we just want to shut our doors and do our own thing. And, they're not helping us. Why should we help them, kind of thing. But, in the end, it really does show how, things like you were just saying, Ryder, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that can bring people together and for just a greater good or for a goal sort of a thing.
Mm-hmm. And then, okay, so now we've got Qui-Gon using a Jedi mind trick on Boss Nass to kind of speed things up here and get them out of this. The conventional wisdom on the Jedi and this particular trick is that it only works on the weak-minded. So, a couple questions here, and Rad, I'll give you an opportunity to answer either one or both of them. First is, what does it say about Qui-Gon using that trick in this moment? And two, what does it say about Boss Nass that it worked?
And I wondered that too. I don't know that in this case it's that he's necessarily weak-minded, but he is not focused on the right things. He's just thinking, his arrogance is coming out. He's thinking, okay, they're not going to find us down here. I don't like Jar Jar. I want him gone. And these humans have no business being here. So Qui-Gon, it feels like, found a little crack in the armor and just went in and used the Jedi mind trick because Boss Nass didn't see it coming. When in Return of the Jedi, when Luke tries to use one on Jabba, it seemed like Jabba was aware of what could happen and he was on guard. Boss Nass, he doesn't strike me as like a stupid person or weak-minded. You don't get to be the leader being weak-minded necessarily, but I felt like it was just the situation that he was in. He was not focused on what these Jedi could do, and he may not have even known they were Jedi. But I do like how the Jedi mind trick kind of tied into the original trilogy, and because we'd seen earlier in this movie with the Jedi running fast and jumping high, and it's like, are these the Jedi we're supposed to know? And it's like, okay, yeah, they actually do some of the same stuff that Obi-Wan and Luke did. So these are the same type of Jedi. It's the same type of force and religion and all that. So I did enjoy that moment. But yeah, I don't know if Boss Nass is a totally weak-minded fool.
Yeah, I think weak-minded, when you say the word weak, there's context and definition, and there's kind of a range in there too. So with Boss Nass and what you brought up, Dennis, too, he probably had never had any kind of contact with Jedi before to really know what they were all about, to know what their skills were, and to know what type of thing they would expect from him. Whereas Jabba, he'd been around the block a few times, his first rodeo. He's been around Jedi quite a bit, and so he kind of knew what to expect and how to put up those walls of defense sort of thing. So I think weak is just, as you said, Ryder, he wasn't expecting it necessarily. And so I think there's a little bit of a difference there. But, as far as Qui-Gon goes, he was just trying to be efficient, I feel like, because they wanted to get on their way. They knew that they needed to get where they needed to go to be able to stop this invasion or, figure out what the heck was going on. And so he just didn't have time for it. So what's the most efficient way? Do some mind tricks, get me a bongo, kind of a thing. So, I'm not saying that it was necessarily the nicest thing for him to do, but necessary in the moment, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a couple other things that tie into the points you're both were making is that this is what Boss Nass wanted to do all along, but he was probably trying to find some way to save face in front of the rest of the Gungans, because I don't think this was an attitude unique to Boss Nass, that the Naboo looked down upon them. So why should they do anything to help the Naboo? Why should they do anything to help these humans that just wandered in? But we want them gone. We want them out of here. Get away from us. And Qui-Gon managed to cut through all that by using the Force suggestion to say, yeah, give us what you want, which is get us out of here. Just give us a transport to do it, which maybe not exactly what Boss Nass wanted to do, but he wanted to get rid of them. And second, and so, that just gave him the out. That just kind of expedited things, as you all were suggesting there. So I agree. And I don't know that it necessarily says anything bad about Qui-Gon, except perhaps it's not an endorsement of his negotiation skills if he's resorting to using the mind trick to accomplish his goals, as opposed to just using persuasion. But probably a minor point.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Persuasive negotiations instead of aggressive negotiations.
Yeah, indeed. Already seen those as movie. So, okay. So they get onto the Bongo and they're headed to the Planet Core. And this is when Obi-Wan asked Jar Jar about why he was banished. And it all comes down to Jar Jar being clumsy. And wow, I translated this right off the closed caption. You'd say bomb de gasser, then crashing der boss's hay liber, then banished. I don't know what any of that means. Other than the banished part, but what, either one of you have a thought on what that means?
I watch things with the captioning on also, Dennis. I love it because it's supposed to clarify things. This did nothing to help clarify anything for me. And I don't know. I think it's supposed to be that, okay, he did something. We're not exactly sure what he did, so we can't really judge whatever he did to say whether or not he should have been banished. That's all I gathered from that.
Jay?
Somewhere along the line, I feel like I saw that this was meant to be that there was some kind of a function going on, and Jar Jar was charged with serving, and he totally messed everything up and made just like a complete public mess of everything. So it's been years, so that may be completely something that my brain pan has since made up in my own head, but I do want to know what a hayblibber is. That's just a fun word.
Yeah,
I like that explanation.
Yeah, I feel like that's like the boss's car almost. So
yeah,
I don't know. We'll find out though. But they don't get too far before they get attacked by the gooberfish, which snags them with its tongue. And then the Sando aqua monster shows up and eats the gooberfish, so they get away. And we get Qui-Gon's oft-repeated line, "There's always a bigger fish." Let's skip over the next scene just so we can come back to, so we don't have to divide this up and get everything discussed in one spot here. And then we'll come back to the Trade Federation in just a second. But, they continue on their way through the Planet Core after that. And Qui-Gon makes your mark, the Force will guide us. And Jar Jar clearly believes in the Force. Oh, Mondo big, the Force. And that's right when the Bongo loses power. Jar Jar starts to panic. Obi-Wan fixes it, only to find out that they're in a cave with a Kolo clawfish, which they then flee from. Qui-Gon uses the Force on Jar Jar to calm him down. He perhaps overdid it, as Obi-Wan points out. And then the Sando aqua monster gets the Kolo clawfish as well. So, Ryder, you were talking earlier, but just kind of like how in Star Wars, we typically get one environment per world. And for the most part, we're really actually getting 3 on Naboo. We get the swamp area, we get the grassy plains, and then we get this underwater ecosystem as well with this gigantic creature. So, what do you think about the underwater life that's here in the gooberfish and such?
Yeah, and I think the water monster is probably at this point the biggest creature we've ever seen in Star Wars. So to see that, like, holy cow! We've seen a Rancor, that was pretty big, but this thing's huge, and the sound that the thing makes, like the sound in this movie is just amazing with the pod race and all that, but this sound is really cool. I don't know, I've never been like that deep under the ocean, so I don't know how much sound is down there, but to hear like these slow, like guttural growls, it just sounds really cool. And I mean, just watching the movie is just cool. And seeing the characters, how they act, their body language in these scenes. Qui-Gon is totally calm and collected. Obi-Wan is pretty stern and a little bugged by Jar Jar. And Jar Jar is like this ball of energy and freaking out. So I know George Lucas, and I think he'd mentioned at some point that these movies could be watched as silent movies. You'd know what's going on. And definitely in these scenes, you would know what was going on and you wouldn't need any sound at all. But yeah, I mean, it's just a good scene. Good scene. Cool creatures.
Oh yeah.
Jay, would you want to go fishing on Naboo?
Probably not. I mean, as long as it'd be fun to be into, something that was like an impenetrable submarine, but the bongo that they had didn't exactly seem very impenetrable. But that's one thing Star Wars has always been so good at, is introducing all these fantastical creatures and, wondrous things. And, even though it's similar to some things that we've seen in the deep, if you look at like 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea and stuff like that, I'm sure that's probably some sort of a influence on what we're seeing here. But yeah, the sounds are amazing. They really are. Good stuff.
Yeah.
I think the Exogorth is probably the only other bigger creature, if you want to count that, from the Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's bigger. You're right.
Yeah, Darth Vader ends up finding one of these Sando aqua monsters in the comics. If you ever read Greg Pak's current run on the Darth Vader comic, it's pretty cool.
Oh, okay.
Highly recommend that one. But basically puts that species into extinction. So we'll see what happens later. But getting back to the scene that is right in the middle of all this, we get back to the Trade Federation battleship. Nute Gunray is giving a report to Darth Sidious, and Sidious reports that the Senate is bogged down in procedures. And he tells them that you'll find Amidala to be young and naive. Controlling her will not be difficult. And Sidious gets off the line. Rune Hako immediately turns to Gunray and says, "You didn't tell him anything about the missing Jedi." To which Nute Gunray responds like, "No need to report that until we have something to report." And I do think it's a little fun that in the background, that door that Qui-Gon was slicing through has been like removed, and you see all the little repair droids leaving. Job well done. Okay, a couple of questions that come out of this here. What did you think about Sidious, who we all know is also Palpatine, and his assessment of Amidala as being young and naive? Ryder?
Yeah, there is so much. I mean, this is what I love about you guys doing these little segments of breaking down the movie, is because this is something I don't know that I would have realized otherwise. There is so much arrogance by these older people in this 10-minute segment. It's unbelievable. He says, "You will find controlling her will not be difficult." Like, are you kidding? And I mean, I guess I could see a 14-year-old kid. Yeah, maybe you think you could control her, but he is so overconfident. And he also doesn't even ask about the Jedi. Like, he just thinks that these Neimoidians could have killed the Jedi that easily. Like, he doesn't even ask if they're dead. He's just blowing past it and assuming that the Jedi have been taken care of. So Palpatine kind of, I don't know. He gets a lot of credit for being such a good planner and being so patient, but he's really overlooking a lot of things with his overconfidence.
Yeah. And it comes to be his overconfidence is his weakness.
Yes.
Kind of. But I think, for him, he's been playing this long game for so long. I feel like he thought that Padme was just going to be this little gnat, that he could just bat aside and figure that, this is just going to be just one little, wrinkle in things, and we'll take care of her real quick.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with this line of dialogue, and I'm wondering if perhaps it just is he considers her young and naive by comparison to the prior queen or the prior rulers of Naboo, because she is young. That's true. Maybe she was naive in believing the Trade Federation wouldn't go as far as they did, but she had no idea they were being backed by a Sith Lord. No one knows that they're back.
Yeah.
They're controlling her will not be difficult. That seems like the most unearned statement of this entire thing.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it. Now, we don't know Padme Amidala from anybody, from anything prior to this movie when we first met. So how would we know as an audience? But, she's, one of the very next times we see her, she's like, "I'll sign no treaty." I mean, that's the exact opposite of controlling her will not be difficult.
Yeah, and I think what is interesting about this is if the people around her didn't respect her, this would have all fallen apart. A 14-year-old or anybody could be saying, yeah, we need to do this and this and this. But if the adults in the room don't respect what she's saying, then they're not going to do it, and the Trade Federation wins. So it gives a lot of credit to Sio Bibble or Captain Panaka, these people who are around her that actually listen to her and don't just blow her off like Palpatine is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other part of this scene is Hago saying to Nute Gunray, you didn't tell him about the missing Jedi. And the Nute Gunray's response was just, no need to report that until we have something to report. Okay. I have been in many situations where there was a difficulty that arose, but there was no point in reporting it to a superior until I had a better idea of which way it was going to go or what our options were in dealing with this. So on one level, I can respect that decision. However, on the other, the missing Jedi, maybe, I mean, how different would things have turned out if they did report that in that moment? Jay, what do you think?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great what if scenario, honestly. Ooh, I'd have to think about that one for a little bit. Ryder, you want to jump
Yeah,
in?
I've never thought about that either. Like, what if they had? I mean, would Palpatine have sent in Darth Maul sooner? Like, we've got to, if let's get this problem taken care of now before the Jedi can rally the troops. If the Jedi hadn't been able to get back to Padme and whoever, whatever situation they came back to, I wonder if the war would have been ended fairly quickly.
See, I understand Gunray is afraid of Sidious. I mean, why wouldn't he be? He's a Sith Lord. It's someone who's got all this power who's very threatening. However, we see later in the movie that, when the Jedi do get away with Padme, Amidala, and they get off the planet, they send Darth Maul after Qui-Gon. And when it comes down to it, at the final battle of this movie, it ends up Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan against Darth Maul, and Maul still manages to kill Qui-Gon before he's cut down by Obi-Wan. Let's assume all that happened in this moment. Well, in this situation, all the guards are still locked up. The Gungans are not the allies of the Naboo.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is a very short war, and at least this phase of Sidious's plans would have been achieved at a level that he still had successes based on the outcome of this movie. He was able to get himself the chancellorship and do other things that set up what came in Attack of the Clones and later Revenge of the Sith. But this is an early victory that puts him ahead of the game. If Gunray had only made that report then.
Yeah, that's true. So,
okay. Well, then not long after that, the Trade Federation arrives at Theed. I think that is such a cool shot when this happens. We see all of the droid tanks. We see the battle droids on their STAPs. We see some of them marching, as they're coming up over the hills, and you see the city there in the distance. And then they come right down that main street, right up to the gates of the Theed Palace, and they all deploy. And then they start taking everything over, and we get to see another awesome shot. I love that shot of Amidala in her iconic red dress with the white makeup on her face and that elaborate hair piece, whatever you want to call it. Jay, you're the fashion person, maybe looking out the window as the droids are rolling in there, and you just see the resignation and the way that she's she's standing up straight, but she's hanging her head just a little bit out of all of this. I think it is an incredibly well done, artful set of scenes. But Ryder, what was your impression of all that?
Well, my impression was that is an amazing shot, and I even put that in my notes when I was prepping for this. That is such a cool shot with her standing there looking out the window, and she doesn't say anything, but like you said, you can tell she's like sad. And being 14 years old and having this happen not as the queen would be traumatic, and then being the queen and knowing you're gonna have to face these grown-ups that are taking over your planet. I don't know. I think it says a lot about her, but I love that. I would love that on like a poster to hang up because it is such a cool shot of her looking out the window.
Jay?
Oh yeah. Going back to what you said too, Dennis, about just the idea that this could be a silent movie. this is part of that. You know, you don't even need to have music. You don't need to have sound effects. From the very get-go, when they're coming down that main strip there in Theed, and, you know, as you said, when they're panning to Amidala and you just see that, as you said, resignation on her face, it's just speaks volumes, and it really gets you. But I just remember thinking to myself how spectacular the visuals were. It was just breathtaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really cool.
Yeah, the CGI for all the grief that it caught later, I think really shined in this scene. You know, with the way that the palace looked, the way that Theed looked, and everything that they were able to accomplish there. But then you want to talk about people who are overconfident. Gunray and Hago land there in Theed, and Gunray steps off of his transport, and he's like, victory, after he hears that the queen's been captured. And, you know, talk about putting the cart before the horse on all of this. And, you know, he doesn't. And I guess, you know, thinking about this now, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, because he just heard from Sidious that Amidala is young and naive and it'll be easy to control. So, and now he's got possession of the city. So why wouldn't he believe that, I guess?
Yeah.
Either of you thought on that?
Yeah. I mean, it seemed like this was an easy invasion. No shots were fired. They just marched right up to the palace. No resistance. I mean, yeah, this is easy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then right after this, the Jedi get to Theed. The bongo breaks the surface of the water. They've emerged from the core, and there they are. And that winds up this segment of the movie. Either one of you have any final thoughts on this segment before we wrap it up?
I thought this was really cool, and I'm glad you picked this for me to be. I'm glad you picked this segment when I was going to be on, because this is probably like an overlooked segment for me. You know, we're going underwater to the Gungan city. There's not a lot of fighting or anything like that, but there's a lot of stuff packed into this 10 plus minutes. And so I thought this is really cool. I just look at it in a totally different way. And now when I watch that movie, when it comes out in theaters in a couple of months, actually, I'll look at it in a totally different way after talking about it with you guys.
Yeah, isn't that exciting? I am so stoked for this to come out in theaters again, and just to be able to see it on the big screen. I cannot wait, because this whole segment was, you know, as you had mentioned before, Ryder, with the world building, is just top notch. You know, this is Star Wars world building at its finest, and just setting up everything from here, and so different from everything that we've seen. And I had mentioned it in the first segment too, that we're in an era where there was so much refined culture, and there was this pristine feeling about everything. And then just seeing these battle droids and this invasion happening, you know that it's going to spoil that beautiful, pristine image of things.
Yeah. The thing that occurred to me when I was finding the segment time to send to you guys in advance so that you would have a chance to prepare for this discussion is like, as I was scanning through it on Disney Plus, it's like, okay, it's the underwater section. And so I was surprised when I sat down and watched this in nearly 11 minutes, how much they packed in to this.
Yeah.
You know, It was the bongo going through the core and meeting the goober fish, the aquasando monster, the colo clawfish, you know, dealing with Boss Nass, meeting Jar Jar Binks. There's a lot accomplished in 11 minutes of this movie. And, you know, most of it is Gungans, but you really do learn a lot about them. So I don't know. I think there are flaws with the scripts when it comes to the prequel trilogy movies. There's no doubt about that. But I do think George Lucas is underrated as a storyteller and what he's able to accomplish in even just a single minute of film time. And, you know, here we had 11 minutes that really quite a bit happened in there. And I just appreciate the whimsy that goes into this. You know, Jay, we did an episode about that, I don't know, 100 episodes or so ago. The idea of the gooberfish and the colo clawfish and all these monsters underwater, they didn't have to be in this movie for anything, and you could still get to the same place that you do at the end of the movie. But he put them in there, and, you know, the words you both been using, or the phrase, I should say, the world building is enriched for it. So, 2 thumbs up.
Yeah. And gooberfish. I mean, they didn't even try to come up with a cool name. They just named it a gooberfish, but it works.
It does.
You know, and especially too when they break the surface of the water there on Naboo, and then the whole like the idea of the membrane thing between Odo Gunga and then the Bongo, and just the fact that they could just push a little simple button and then all of a sudden it's open. There's this like open cockpit. How fun would it be to be part of that crew that created these things, and just the imagination that goes in it? I was always so impressed with that.
Would you rather do that or work on the wardrobes, Jay?
Oh, work on the wardrobes, of course.
Okay.
But yeah, I admire the other imagination stuff from afar.
Yeah.
But I could totally get into that work. Yeah, on the wardrobes.
Let's not be crazy, Ryder. We both know who you are. So.
Sorry, I don't want to push too far. One of my guests here.
That's all right. Okay. Well, Ryder, thanks again for showing up and bringing your A game as you always do on these segments. It's been a pleasure, as always, to have you here. Before you head out, I want to remind everybody where you can be found and followed.
Yeah, so you can follow me on X and Instagram at Ryder Waldron DDS, and you can listen to Idiot's Array and Star Wars School of Dentistry just wherever you find your podcast. So subscribe and listen and check them out. And we'd love to have some new listeners.
All right. Well, it's been too long since we had you on the show last time, even though you are our first Gold Jacket guest. So we'll make sure to get you back sooner rather than later. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, there he was, the man, the myth, the legend, Ryder Waldron, joining us there for our second installment of the Phantom Menace discussion. It was fun having him back. We say this, I think, every month when we do one of these. Like, we get these great guests, and we just don't talk to them often enough. And so we'll have to figure out how to get Ryder back sooner rather than later.
Exactly. But I'm very thankful that we do have the excuse of our podcast episodes to be able to have our friends back on, because, sometimes it seems like, though, we do so many episodes in between, and it's hard to keep track sometimes of how long it's been. And then when you realize how long it's been, it's like, holy cow, it really has been a very long time. But yeah, Ryder's always amazing, and definitely going to make it on my list of to-do things to find an actual gold jacket.
Yeah. So anyways, we'll have to definitely get Ryder back sometime soon. It's been fun. It's just pull the curtain back. We do up to 3 episodes a week, record them all at the same time. So sometimes we just got to fit this into our schedule when we can. And that's not always conducive to having a guest on the show, but it's always fun when we do manage to make it work.
Oh, for sure.
So just want to say thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our ongoing series covering the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher of choice, and you'll get all future entries in the series. We should have 10 more coming up before the end of the year. I'd also like to remind you that you can find our entire catalog of shows over on retrozapp.com, which is home to several other great podcasts covering everything that's great in geek culture these days. So head over there and check that out. We always appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews on whatever podcatchers that you use to catch your podcast, especially if that's Apple Podcasts. And we love it when you share the show and your favorite episodes on social media with your friends. So speaking of which, Jay, you want to remind everybody what those social media contacts are one more time?
Absolutely. We are on Facebook and Instagram and also X at Podcast Stardust. And you can hit us up on our Pinterest boards and our YouTube channel. And we are also now on YouTube Music. And so we've been doing that for a little over a month now, and getting a lot of really great responses and things over there. So head on over, like, and subscribe. And if you're up for some real-time chatter, you can hit us up on our Discord room, which is part of the RetroZap Discord server. So there are tons of different rooms over there full of just all kinds of pop culture geekery goodness. And so if you want to get in on that, just go to our show page, click on our community tab, and you are there. And we do have our swag still available over on TeePublic, where we are teepublic.com/user/podcast stardust. That link is in our show notes. So if you'd like to pick up one of our 7 different show logo designs, we would really appreciate that. And it does help to support the show. And another way you can support the show, which is a heck of a lot of fun, is by picking up a new lightsaber from Saber Masters. So we have a referral code, Stardust, and the link will be in our show notes as well. But if you go to www.sabermasters.com and you check out all of those amazing sabers over there, you just use the code Stardust at checkout, and you will help out the show. And we are so excited to be able to show off our lightsabers here towards the end of this month. So with that, Dennis, why don't you let everybody know what else you got going on in your podcasting world and anything coming up?
So we have narrowed it down that Star Trek Discovery is returning at the beginning of April. I think it's April 4th. And when that happens, my wife Beth and I will be covering the 5th and final season Discovery over on our Star Trek podcast, which is known as Warp Trails. And you can find that exclusively on the RetroZap podcast feed. Head to your favorite podcatcher, check out the RetroZap feed, and you can find us there. And if you want all our past episodes, just go to retrozap.com. Jay, what is going on in cosplay?
All right. So right now I'm finally got my DMs back over on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. It was a few weeks I was not able to see those, and it was very frustrating, but all of a sudden, just like magic, they have reappeared. So that's good. So if you've been wondering why I haven't been getting back to you, if you've been DMing me, that's why. But you can still catch me as Ahsoka and Hera and Fourth Sister. And I'm still working on my OC Mandalorian for Fan Expo Cleveland in April. And that deadline is looming big right now. So I'm hoping to get some more time to work on some things. But again, just go over to j.snipscosplay on Instagram and you can have all kinds of fun with me.
Okay, coming up on the show this Friday, we'll be getting into Star Wars news, and then on Monday, we'll begin our coverage of Season 3 of The Bad Batch. That may not always be on Mondays, but we got 3 episodes, so we're going to try and get those out on Friday, but we'll just see what happens with the way that the schedule unfolds this season, last season. That's too bad. Okay, with that having been said, just want to thank you all for listening to episode 693 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Until next time, may the Force be with you.